Welcome to the McAfee Center Stage webinar series. My name is Austin and I will be your facilitator. This webinar is a brief overview covering the common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing, as it is not possible to cover all detailed scenarios in an hour. If assistance is needed, please contact McAfee Technical Support. Our presenter today is Travis Merritt. Travis has been at McAfee for 7 years, primarily supporting enterprise consumers in the Enabling Technologies vertical, EPO, MA, TIE, DXL, and MAR. He joined McAfee in 2012 after studying Geographic Information Systems at the University of North Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Travis.
Thank you very much, Austin. I'll go ahead and begin our presentation now. So today we're going to be focusing on using and troubleshooting the MAR workspace. Let me go ahead and show you our agenda for today's presentation. I'm going to start off by giving you an introduction to MAR, give you an overview of the components used and how they work together. Then I will run a sample trace and show you exactly what information is reported to the MAR workspace from that test file. From there, we'll use that sample trace to do a demonstration of using MAR to quarantine potentially infected systems and how to prevent any new executions of that potentially malicious file from executing anywhere else in the environment. We'll conclude the presentation with an overview of how to troubleshoot and diagnose why the MAR workspace can sometimes appear blank with no trace data available. Let me start off by showing you the acronyms and abbreviations that you'll see within this product and throughout the presentation. So at the top of the list, we have MAR, which is McAfee Active Response, as well as ePolicy Orchestrator, TIE, and DXL. And the one you probably haven't seen before is IPE. This is our integration pattern engine, which is a piece of the DXL broker that is responsible for forwarding trace data up to the EPO cloud backend. We also rely on endpoint security and ATP, or adaptive threat protection, for full functionality of MAR. So what is MAR? MAR, or Active Response, is an endpoint detection and response tool that finds and allows for a rapid response to various potential threats throughout the environment. We leverage a shared threat intelligence data from several sources, including TIE and ATP, to help determine the right reaction to carry out for any given threat. MAR also includes a pretty powerful search feature that allows users to pull very valuable information from endpoints using a variety of built-in collectors. You also have the option to create your own custom collectors if there's a specific bit of information you're looking for from your machines. The primary components of MAR include an on-prem virtual server as well as an endpoint client. The MAR server is installed to a new or existing TIE server, and its role is to store the MAR catalog and aggregate any search results. The catalog of MAR includes all of the collectors, triggers, and reactions that are used to carry out your MAR searches, as well as react to any suspicious or malicious endpoint activity that you see reported in the workspace. The catalog itself is actually stored inside the TIE Postgres database, and this is why a MAR server must be installed on top of a TIE server. The Active Response client is to be installed in each managed system in the environment. The client will handle actually tracing the process execution from start to finish and gather and return any of the search results that you've requested through the MAR search. As you see in the picture there, the data exchange layer is the communication mechanism used between MAR to facilitate searches and traces. Trace data that's been gathered by the MAR client is sent via the local DXL client to the connected DXL broker, and then the broker will forward that trace data or upload that trace data to the McAfee cloud via the integration pattern engine, or IPE. Like I mentioned previously, the IPE is an internal component of the DXL broker, simply used to extend the functionality of DXL. IPE uses a few connectors in order to upload trace data to the McAfee Cloud Services, and you'll see references to those connectors throughout the IPE log during the troubleshooting section of this presentation. Finally, we leverage EPO simply for its UI to interact with MAR. This is EPO is where you'll access the MAR workspace as well as execute and view MAR search data. And lastly, we rely on the cloud storage and services. The trace data is uploaded to the EPO cloud backend, so you must have an active EPO cloud account required to use MAR. That same cloud account must be actively linked within the EPO cloud bridge of your on-prem EPO server. Trace data gets stored in one of three geolocations. These are displayed to the URLs to the right. We have the EU, US East, and US West. Each of those locations have independent storage, so and should not be switched after they're initially defined. If you set up MAR and pick US East for your data storage location and allow data to be uploaded there for a couple of weeks, those traces will always be on US East. So if you go later on and switch to US West, you'll essentially have a separated data set where you'll have some trace data stored in US East and new data stored in US West. We do not actually support switching those around. There's no mechanism in place to migrate data from one location to another. So I want to go ahead and show you the threat workspace. Let me switch into the on-prem EPO server in my lab here. All right, this is running on EPO 5.10. I'll go ahead and log in here and bring up the MAR workspace. So we'll go to Menu, Systems, Active Response Workspace, and allow the page to load. Okay, so let me give you an overview of what we're seeing here. So at the top of the page is the summary bar, which gives you an at-a-glance view of the total number of threats, which are categorized into individual buckets by severity level. The number of threats displayed here will dynamically shift and adjust based on the filter you have set for the date range or time range. For example, you can see here we have it set to the default of last 3 days. From the summary bar, you can access a list of currently quarantined hosts and view a list of the remediation history. When a user carries out an action from within the threat workspace, the remediation history is where that action will be logged. There's also a subsequent entry in the audit log for EPO for any actions that are carried out within the MAR workspace as well. Clicking the quarantine host will actually open a new tab and populate and run a MAR search for you to return the list of any hosts that you have currently quarantined. Moving down from there, we have the potential threats here on the left. This is the list of process names and their associated MD5 hashes based on the date range filter defined in the summary bar. Each parent process is listed here, along with a count of the number of affected hosts and the time in days since the threat was first executed in the environment. The main point I want to highlight here is that this is based on the file hash and not the file name. So for example, it's possible to have a threat that changes its name but maintains the same file hash. So in this case, you would only see one entry for that file in the potential threat list. The opposite is true as well. You can also have many different files all sharing the same name, but each having a unique hash. Because the hash is unique, our products will treat those as individual files. So here's a good example of a file that's changed name over time. What you'll see here in the trace is threatmaker.exe has been used to generate this data. And if you look here, you can see that it's actually had 3 different names. When it was first observed, it was called threat.exe. I then renamed it to threat-maker.exe and executed it again. But it's the same file because it has the same hash, and it's just tracking the different names. If we were to pull this same file up in the TIE reputations page, TIE would actually list out each individual name for you as well. So one common question we get is why is this list called potential threats? And that's simply due to the fact that MAR is intended to help you make a final decision on whether or not a given file is either known trusted or known malicious. So entries in the workspace are items that were scanned by all the available scan engines from ENS Threat Prevention, ATP, TIE, so on and so forth. And at the end of those scans, a conclusive determination of its trustworthiness wasn't able to be established. So MAR traced the execution of the file and provides you a summary view of exactly what that file did to help you make a decision on whether or not the action it performed was legitimate or if it was something that looked malicious. All right, so up here we have the affected hosts. This lists details about each host or endpoint or system that has a MAR client installed, which was associated with the selected threat. The list here will include systems that currently have this process running, as well as a list of systems that have run it in the past. You can select one or more hosts from this panel and complete any of the host actions that are available in the dropdown. So instead of having to navigate out of the MAR search page to run a search and reaction based on the results you find here, the host actions dropdown menu gives you a quick, easy access to some of the most common MAR reactions that you would want to run to respond to these potential threats. So let me show you that right now. So if you select this threat here, this menu becomes available, and you can see here we have the option to stop the process, stop and remove the process, dismiss the threat from the potential threats list, quarantine the system, or remove the system from quarantine. And that's grayed out simply because we don't currently have the system quarantined. So stop process is pretty self-explanatory. This is going to kill any instance of the selected process tree, which will include the root and any child processes that are currently running underneath it. Stop and remove, it takes it a step further. It'll kill the selected instance of the process and remove the file. It's a permanent removal, so you want to be very careful with this reaction. Dismiss simply removes the threat from the potential threat list. This action does not change the affected host or update the TIE reputation database in any way. The potential threat will reappear in the workspace in the event that the same process with the same hash runs again on any system in the environment. So dismiss is basically a temporary ignore option if you want to just clear it from your queue. Quarantine does exactly what you think it would. It actually will isolate the host from the network while retaining connectivity to all of the McAfee products, including the agent and DXL. So you don't lose connectivity with EPO or to the DXL fabric. The benefit to that is that you can continue to run searches on the quarantine host to help you investigate the potential threat and complete your forensic analysis on the machine. When you complete this action, a message notifies the user that the quarantine has taken place. They also get a notification on their screen when the system has been removed from quarantine. Quarantine the machine is maintained between rebooting as well as shutting down the machine. You can view, like I mentioned earlier, the entire list of quarantined hosts by selecting the quarantine host button from the summary bar. I'll demonstrate this feature a little later on in the presentation. So over here on the right, we have the reputation cards, is what we've referred to those as. The first card on the top right-hand side displays the reputation information retrieved from the TIE server. And this Global Actions dropdown allows you to set an enterprise override directly from the MAR workspace. Setting the reputation here will update the reputation information in the TIE database and is the same as setting an enterprise override on the TIE reputations page directly. You can also choose to dismiss the potential threat from this dropdown as well. And again, dismissing the threat simply removes it from the list of potential threats in the MAR workspace. Doesn't actually make any changes to the rest of the environment. File details here lists, let me scroll down, the file details box here lists basically everything we know about the file at a glance. Includes the first scene name and all available hash details. And for this particular process, we see the first scene name and the alternate names, the MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-2. Okay, and you might have noticed that the reputations here for TIE, GTI, and ATD all show unknown or not available. So this is accurate. TIE's reputation for this file is unknown, which is one of the main reasons MAR traced the file. GTI did not have a reputation for this file either, because it's a brand new file with a brand new hash. And ATD, in this instance, is not configured with this environment, which is why the sandbox results here are also unavailable. If you had a ATD server available and configured with your MAR configuration, you would be able to pull ATD sandboxing reports and view them here. So let's move on to the trace window itself. So for this example, What we did was we ran threatmaker.exe, which actually created a folder with another executable in it called data generator. And I executed data generator on my endpoints. You can see that it ran on Win7 Alpha as well as Win7 Bravo. This same file was ran on both these machines because it shares the same hash. So what we can see here in the trace window is exactly what the file did, or what Mars saw the file do. Let me expand this out by clicking this button here and give you an overview of what you can find and what you can learn from the trace results. So the trace you see, it opened with a pre-selected filter, filtered by severity currently. And digging down right into this, we see that what happened here is Explorer, which is represented by a process gear, launched a process called Data Generator, and Data Generator launched a process called test.exe, and also injected a DLL into test.exe. If we follow the trace lines across here, you'll see that the mouse cursor changes to give you some tool tips. And if we click on this, a flyout window will be displayed, which gives us the details about the instance of Explorer from this particular machine, along with the reputation details. So Explorer in this case is a known trusted process. It was just doing its job and was asked to run this particular file by the user. One other tooltip that is critical to know is this one here in the end, which says that we're missing a process termination event. All that tells us is that Explorer is probably still running on this machine. So what we're mainly interested in is what Mara is highlighting in red for us here, which is the data generator process itself. So let's go ahead and click on that process here. And right off the bat, we can see some more interesting details. We know that the process was started at this particular timestamp. And we also get information about the behaviors that Mara observed, which these behaviors are going to be triggered by certain content rules that the MAR engine runs against the files to determine whether or not it should trace it and what that trace severity should be defined as. We also get additional process details here, including the full name, the PID of the process on the machine, and the command line that was used to run the process. Down here in the file info section, we see the details that Ty has for the file. Its local reputation from ATP is unknown, which is expected, again, because this file gets generated with a new hash every time it runs, so ATP would never know what its reputation is. You'll also notice that all of these details are links, and if we click on them, an available list of options is given to us. Now, all of these options, if we click on them, will actually open a MAR search in a new tab, so we can get details on exactly which processes or which other hosts are running this process in the environment, so we know which machines to focus on. So all of these can be used in your investigation to determine the proper response and which machines need to be responded to. These all give similar searches to find on this host or find on all hosts, so you can get additional details as needed. To get further information about what this process did when it was executed, we can actually clear the applied filter. So let me go ahead and do that now. And we'll close this window just to give us a little better view. And you can see there's quite a bit more information here. Let me go over some of these icons for you because they're a little bit cryptic. The gear, as we already explained, is a process. The key represents a registry key modification, and the page icon represents a file modification event. That can include any file operation like file created, file modified, file executed, file deleted, what have you. Viewing the filter right here shows us that there's one other symbol that we're not seeing, which is network connections. So we do trace network connections if this process were to have opened its own connection to some other, say a command and control server, that would have been traced. However, the data generator does not open any network connections. Interestingly, though, it does, if you follow this trace down, end up spawning its own process, own instance of Internet Explorer. So we see the trace information for Internet Explorer. And we can follow Internet Explorer's trace across to see what Internet Explorer did when it opened. And we can see it here that it touched a registry key. It did a registry key create, and it modified a registry key. So we can expand those and see exactly what registry key was accessed or modified by Internet Explorer. And if we follow this further down the line here, we see all the other objects that were modified by Internet Explorer on the machine when it opened. Not that this is necessarily malicious behavior by the Internet Explorer. Again, MAR is just showing you exactly what happened when we launched Data Generator. And we can tell that Internet Explorer is a child process of Data Generator, and we can also tell, as before, that there's no process termination event for Internet Explorer, so that instance of IE is actually still running. So we can examine all of the details that happened when this process launched, all the way down here to where we get a new process called test.exe, which has this special syringe icon on it, which simply, like I said earlier, represents an injection event. So you see here code injection, the process name was test.exe, the process ID again, and the command line information. All right, so after reviewing this process trace, I've decided that this is not a process that I want to have running on any of my systems. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to the available host actions and stop the process. In this case, I don't want to remove the process from the machine because, say I want to be able to collect a copy of it for this host later on for additional analysis, I don't want the file to be completely deleted. Let me collapse this and go back to our host actions menu here. We'll select both of these machines and choose our host action to stop the process. Now I actually do have the target machine, one of them at least, up here in the remote session. So let me show you that before we kill these processes off. You can see in Task Manager, Data Generator.exe is running. You can see an instance of Internet Explorer running here, and this was launched by the result of running Data Generator.exe. You can see all the interesting code that Data Generator.exe ran to do its dirty work here. And finally, if we scroll down in our process list here in Task Manager, we'll see test.exe is also running. So to clear that up, let me go ahead and execute the stop process reaction. What this is actually going to do is send a DXL message that includes a built-in MAR reaction to kill the process based on the specific criteria with this selected host and this selected process. Once the DXL message is actually received at the endpoint, the MAR client will be used to stop the data generator process, as well as all of its child processes that it spawned. So in this case, both IE and test.exe should also be terminated. So let's go ahead and run this now. Actually, just for the sake of troubleshooting, later on, we're going to focus on Win7 Alpha for now. So let me go ahead and kill this. And we get a little warning saying that this action will stop all instances of the root process plus its child process on the one selected host. So we can go and confirm that. The reason we get the pop-up here is because you want to be careful with what reactions you're running with MAR because it's going to do what you ask it to do. And you wouldn't want to kill something legitimate that is being used on a production machine. So I'll go ahead and confirm this. And right now our request is being broadcast out over the DXL fabric, and once the message is received, we'll see those processes have automatically been stopped. And it's pretty much instantaneous because the DXL client connection to the DXL broker and the rest of the DXL fabric is a persistent connection. So if we go back through Task Manager here, we'll see that Data Generator is no longer running, test.exe is no longer running, and Internet Explorer has been closed. If you were looking at the trace data, you'll notice that the file path we were running from was inside of this output folder. So the files do still exist on disk. So if needed, I could come in here and grab them as samples to submit to McAfee Labs for further analysis or to collect them for my own analysis later on. So because they're still sitting here, some cases it may be beneficial to go ahead and quarantine the machine to isolate it from the network. So I'm going to go ahead and use the quarantine host action on this machine here to show you how that's going to behave. Once the reaction has been executed by the MAR client, the RDP session that we have open here will close. So I'll switch over to a local console session so you can see the end user notification that the system has been quarantined. Once it's been quarantined, you can go ahead and safely perform your forensics activities on the machine as needed without risk of exposing other machines to this potential threat. So one thing, one kind of gotcha on that message is that it's actually not turned on by default, the quarantine message for the end user. So before quarantining, what I recommend is to go to your policy catalog for active response policies and just check and make sure that the quarantine message has been enabled. The quarantine action is completed by the network flow plugin of the MAR client, and so that's where the policy option exists. You can customize the message to your like and save the policy and get it propagated throughout your environment. In this case, we already have it set. So let me go back to the MAR workspace. Wait for the information to load. We'll select our process again, and we'll select our target system. And we'll go ahead and ask MAR to quarantine this machine for us. Again, we get the confirmation dialog saying that you're actually going to remove the system or disconnect the host from the network. It's still going to retain its connectivity to McAfee products, so we still have agent communication, we still have DXL connectivity. Any other McAfee products that you may manage on the machine will still have their communication channels open to them. One word of caution with this action: if the machine is connected to, say, a VPN client, the VPN client is in all likelihood not a trusted McAfee process. So that process would not be allowed on the network stack, which means that if you were to quarantine a machine that's connected to VPN, that machine would be indefinitely quarantined, at least until it connected back to the DXL fabric, either by having a DXL broker in the DMZ or by bringing the machine back onto the corporate network. So do be careful when you're quarantining systems. The only word of warning, like I mentioned, is when you have VPN connected clients. Otherwise, to reconnect or reestablish network connection, you simply run the unquarantine reaction. And again, these reactions, because they carried out via DXL, are very rapid. So let's go ahead and confirm this. And what we should see happen is the tab here should close out once the network has been disconnected. All right, so there you see the tab is closed, and that's because our RDP session was actually lost to that machine. So what I'll go ahead and do now is open up that local. Okay, so here's our local terminal session to this system, and right on the screen here, even on the login screen, you can see that we have the pop-up message stating that the endpoint has been quarantined and disconnected from the network. So you can just click the OK button to dismiss this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and log into this system. All right, so let me move this back out of the way. As you can see there, our sample files are still there. And we'll go back to EPO, and let's go ahead and show you the list of quarantine hosts that feature here in MAR. So we'll just click the button here, and like I mentioned, it's going to open a new tab, and go ahead and populate our search and run it for us. And right there, we see the one result of the one machine we have quarantined. The other machine that was in the trace result isn't here because we didn't quarantine it. So it's still actually out there running with that sample on it. So our next step in the process here to protect our environment is to ensure that the potentially malicious threat doesn't run again on any of my systems. So to do that, we're going to carry out a global action from the MAR workspace to set the reputation to no malicious. That will set the reputation override and tie, and when the process attempts to run again, ENS ATP will take action according to its assigned policy. So let me go ahead and show you my ATP policy. Because for this to work, ATP needs to be set to enforce mode, so we have observe mode disabled. It also needs to be set to block threats when the reputation threshold is reached. So since our process is going to be known malicious, ATP will. Let's go ahead and head back to the MAR workspace. Find our machine again. And actually, for this example, you don't have to select the machine to set the global action. So we'll just go ahead and say, after analysis, we've looked at all this and decided that this process is indeed malicious. So we'll go ahead and set this here. Again, we get our pop-up just to be certain. It's going to set the reputation to known malicious and tie. Any child process that it started will be killed, which we've already done, but not removed. So let's go ahead and confirm this. All right. Now, this page does have to refresh to reflect the new data from TIE, but what we can do is just to confirm, we can head over to the TIE reputations page, and let's find our file. All right, so here it is right here, data generator with its hash in the name. You can see the composite reputation is now known malicious based on the enterprise reputation, which the enterprise reputation is simply present because of the override we set. So let's head back to the workspace. And what you'll notice now is that that file no longer appears in our potential threat list. And that's because MAR has basically considered that we've done what we need to do to progress forward now. So we've analyzed that threat, and we've decided how we're going to treat it going forward. And so it's out of our queue. If we go to the remediation history list now, we'll see the actions that we've completed so far. All right, so these are the actions we've done. First, we stopped the process. Then we made it known malicious, and that in turn caused the threat to be dismissed. So we'll go ahead and close that tab. All right, and let's go ahead and just make sure that ATP has indeed received the new TIE reputation and does not allow this file to run any longer. So we'll go ahead and execute this. And in fact, it did not get ran. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that machine from quarantine. To do that, we're going to go back to the MAR workspace. Pull up our list of quarantine hosts. And we'll select it here from the list. Go down to Actions, Execute Reaction, and we'll pick on the unquarantine host reaction. This is going to restore its network connectivity to all other processes outside of McAfee as well. Now, once that reaction completes, if we were to rerun this search, it'll no longer be listed here in our result set. And now our reaction should have completed. We'll go ahead and run the search one more time. And indeed, we get no results found. So our network connection has been restored to this machine. Okay. Hopefully that gives you some helpful information on what can be seen within a MAR trace, as well as the options available for handling a potential threat on the MAR workspace. The overall goal with MAR workspace is to give you enough information to make an informed decision on if the process in question is something legitimate or something malicious, and then be able to react accordingly. So we're now going to shift gears into troubleshooting the MAR workspace. Let me pull back up our PowerPoint presentation here. Here's kind of a very high-level outline of the components and settings you need to check in the scenario that your workspace data is missing or not showing up as expected. So we'll go through this in EPO as well, but there's 4 categories of things to check on and enable to help your troubleshooting process. The bulk of it's going to be done on the EPO server settings page. You're going to want to ensure that the DXL topology is healthy, that you don't have any disconnected brokers. You also want to make sure that your brokers have the option selected to forward trace data to the cloud. That needs to be enabled on the brokers that are handling MAR clients. You have to have the cloud databus URL configured in the MAR workspace. And if you use a proxy server in the environment, the proxy address needs to be defined along with any authentication parameters. That proxy address, if it's necessary, is what the DXL brokers will use to reach out to the EPO cloud. Finally, you'll have to have your EPO cloud account linked to your on-prem EPO server using the EPO Cloud Bridge. Some other gotchas include the MAR client policy itself. There is a separate trace plugin that has to be enabled within the policy. If you're running into the issue where you don't have data showing from the workspace, one of the first things you want to do is turn on the MAR log to debug level, wake up the machine, and then run a test file. You should see in the MAR log that the client is in fact tracing, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. The other piece of the equation here is the EPO server. Whenever we load the workspace results in EPO, EPO is actually making an HTTPS request out to the MAR URLs, the cloud URLs rather, and issuing a API request, and the results are returned to that API request. So in the Orion log at debug level, you'll see the request as well as the response. So if you're getting something other than a successful response, that can give you some clues onto what to look for at the network level. And finally, on the DXL broker itself, there is an IPE log that you can take a look at to look for any connection errors between IPE and the EPO cloud. One of the tests we like to use in support is a curl connection test, just to make sure that you are able to reach the cloud URLs from your broker. So I'll go ahead and step back into the EPO server to show you those settings. So we're going to go ahead and navigate over to the EPO configuration server settings screen. We'll take a look at our DXL topology to start with. In this environment, we have 2 brokers, one running on a Windows broker on the EPO server itself as the parent broker, and then one running on our MAR tied DXL combo box here. You can see here the broker extension for both of these is enabled to provide trace data to the cloud from our workspace. That's an easy gotcha. Simple fix sometimes is to just turn that feature on. That enables the broker to leverage the IPE engine to send its traces. The other section here that we need to review is the cloud DXL Cloud Data Bus. The URL defined here is set on your initial configuration of MAR. And if your company does use a web proxy, this needs to be defined here. In this particular lab environment, this is the proxy that we use to reach out to the cloud services. The other server setting that was mentioned is the EPO Cloud Bridge. This status needs to show actively linked to your cloud account. If it doesn't, there's a KB that steps you through how to troubleshoot why the link may be failing. It wasn't on the slide, but I just want to briefly mention it. The ties, MAR depends on ties so heavily that it's important to make sure that your tie server health checks are all completing as well. If tie is in a bad state, then we can't really expect MAR to work properly. I'll go ahead and show you the policy option as well for the MAR client that needs to be enabled in order to facilitate tracing. So we'll take a look here at the McAfee Active Response default policy. And in the Trace tab, we have the Trace plugin enabled. So be sure to have that turned on. And if you're not seeing trace data, this is another easy thing to make sure that you have selected. While you're here, if you're troubleshooting MAR tracing, you can go ahead and turn the file log level to debug and save the policy. So I'll go ahead and show you what the MAR log looks like. We'll go ahead and log back in to RDP on our system here. Okay, and the file we're looking for here is called marlog.log. Keyword string to search for in this log is sending trace event. All right, so we know here that this machine did indeed upload a trace and sent it to the DXL client. The trace content is in this entire string here. So here's the trace data. You can see the OS, the product version, the trace ID, and a whole bunch of other details about what happened in this trace. So we know the client is running traces. The next place to look is to the DXL broker that this machine is connected to. The next bit of information we want to look at then would be the IPE log on the DXL broker. Now, in order for you to see what it looks like when it's not working, so that you know what the connection error in that IPE log looks like, I'm going to go ahead and intentionally break my environment. What we're going to go ahead and do is remove the proxy details from the cloud bridge. I'm sorry, the DXL Cloud Data Bus. So we'll just go ahead and turn that option off, save that, and have our agent check into EPO to pull new policies. Okay, and while it's enforcing downloading new policies, we'll go ahead and run another trace on this test client over here. I'm going to delete our previous example and make a new one so that we have a new hash to work with. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and take a look at the IPE log. That log file is on var McAfee DXL broker logs IPE.log. And off the bat here, we can see some connection timeouts going on. So this would be a good indicator that it's time to look into what's going on the network side of things and make sure that the broker is allowed outbound through any firewalls or proxy servers you have. You can see here the log shows us we're trying to connect to api1.us2.soc.macafee.com using these IP addresses, and we're getting connection timeouts. So since we are seeing a connection issue here, the test we'd want to run next is a curl test to see if we have connectivity to the cloud backend. So let me switch back into our PowerPoint and show you what that would look like. So you'd want to log into the broker using your SSH client and run this command here, curl-kv, followed by the URL for your data location that you have defined. The terminal output should display a successful connection, indicating the port and the IP address it connected to. Now, here's a table that gives you an overview of the logs that can be used to help diagnose a MAR trace failure. Again, we have the marlog.log. It needs to be in debug mode in order to see the traces. In the event your DXL client connection was failing, there's a DXL service log stored on the local machine as well. In the same path, C program data, McAfee data exchange layer. This would be logging errors if you couldn't connect to your broker. The IPE log on the DXL broker itself. For non-Windows brokers, that's under var McAfee DXL broker logs IPE.log, or on a Windows broker, it'll actually be under C program data McAfee DXL broker logs. The last piece of the puzzle here would be the Orion log in debug mode to see those HTTP requests and responses flowing to and from the MAR backend. All right, so in this RDP session, we can see an example of what the log looks like when this is working, showing the request going out to https api1.sock.macafee.com, and down here in the second bullet, the response with the amount of time it took and the HTTP return code. So if you saw something other than an HTTP 200 response code here, you would know that the next step to do is to take a look at the network and make sure EPO, the server itself, is allowed to reach out to the MAR Cloud Services backend URLs.
Thanks so much for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to Travis. As a reminder to everyone, we are expanding our customer self-service capabilities, including but not limited to our McAfee Enterprise Support app for Android and iOS, new product support pages, the support community, McAfee Support YouTube channel, social media help needs on Facebook and Twitter.